Greetings, young disciples in the Diocese of Atlanta. I pray you and your loved ones are all doing well. I commend your efforts to address this very important but divisive issue in the lives of Americans today. Special thanks to Liz Beale Kidd, whom I have known for a couple decades, for her invitation to be part of this project. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be with you and to share some of my journey with you, particularly as a person of color in America, especially also as an immigrant, and even more so in the current time and climate of consciousness in our nation and the world around the issue of racism and discrimination. I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church and have been since 1996 when I was received. But I came here as a priest from Trinidad and Tobago, ordained in 1994, to serve Christ's one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. This is not my first stint in America. I came here way back in 1977 to attend Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, Michigan, on a track and field scholarship. However, in 1978, I transferred to Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, an HBCU, or Historically Black College or University, from which I graduated in 1982 with a degree in psychology. I returned to Trinidad in 1983, but came back to the United States to attend Seabury Western Theological Seminary in 1990, along with my wife Michelle, from whom you will hear shortly as she joins me in this conversation with you. Michelle has been vital to my ordained ministry and also is the doting mother of our two sons, Sekani Akil and Jelani Akida. I pray that you all have had the opportunity to read or simply to take a look at my letter to the Diocese of New Jersey entitled Screaming for Justice, which appeared in our weekly newsletter, Good News in the Garden State, on June 12th, 2020. In the letter, I spoke about, 1, the 400 years of cruel and dehumanizing injustice against people of color. 2, the targeting of and subsequent aberrant treatment, the unfair imprisonment, and the most brutal death of black and brown people by police. 3, the fact that the Church, disciples of Jesus Christ, are not living up to our call to practice our baptismal covenant, that is, to strive for justice and peace among all people, and to respect the dignity of every human being. And I ended my article with a quote from Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, which was written in 1963, the same year of the March on Washington, and sadly, the death of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Emperor Selassie said, and I quote, that until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, that until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. End quote. Michelle and I are from a tiny country in the Caribbean with a population of about 1.5 million people. But we grew up with more rights than most persons of color in America. We gained independence from Britain in 1962, but slavery was abolished there in 1836. So for 126 years, we were the subjects of colonists, colonializers, and with conquest by the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, and the British. However, we experienced degrees of autonomy for several years and finally earned self-governance in 1962. But minus the level of struggle for equal human and voting rights as the black and brown persons in America, nor with the reckless disregard for the law and God-given human life of persons of color. I will stop now so that Michelle and I could share our stories with you.
Okay, so let's go to the beginning. For you in Trinidad, as a young person, tell us about that.
Okay, glad you asked. So, as a 15-year-old high school student in Port of Spain, Trinidad, which is the capital, the city, I lived about 9 miles away from the city, but I went to school in the city. And back in 1970, there was what we called the Black Power Revolution. And that was really, stirred up by events that had occurred at the George Williams University in Montreal, Canada in 1969, when a number of students basically kind of held the campus hostage by occupying the computer building, the 9th floor of the computer building at that university, because of racial discrimination that they had experienced, particularly the black students from the Caribbean. And so they protested, and they had this 13-day long protest that ended with the arrest of 97 students and the loss by the university of about $2 million worth of computer equipment. And so coming out of that uprising at the Sir George Williams University in Montreal, because of the fact that you had so many folks from the Caribbean, and particularly there was one well-known student from Trinidad, the students at the University of the West Indies kind of supported that whole idea of responding to discrimination and even addressing some of those issues that continue to occur even in post-colonial Trinidad in 1970. So as a 15-year-old student, I was basically impressed with the events of the protests in Trinidad to try to get more persons of color employed by banks and some of the multinational corporations that were in Trinidad at the time. So there was this uprising, and so we call it the 1970 revolution. A number of people lost their lives. But I think it began something, and we are actually the products of that today, into the fact that, they had to make changes in terms of employing black persons in the banks and other places. There was one event that was brought to my attention as I was researching some of this, that one of the banks, the Barclays Bank, had one black person. This was 1970. One black person who was working in the bank, and people used to go into the bank, black people, just so that they could see this brother
Who was
working in the bank among all these light-skinned and white people in Trinidad and Tobago. So the revolution occurred. It really impressed upon me. I had brothers who were members of the group that gathered to get people together, the National Joint Action Committee. And so I was witnessing all of this happening in Trinidad, and to be a part of that change. So when I came to the United States of America, 7 years after that, 1977, when I landed in the United States, I came here with the knowledge that there was racial discrimination in America, and that persons of color were not equally or fairly treated, and that was a risk, and I was actually benefiting from the fact that I had an older brother who was already living and going to school at Tougaloo College in Mississippi. He went there from 1971. So he would tell us stories about what life was like for black students at that HBCU, and just living in Jackson, Mississippi at the time. So I came here with some of that knowledge already.
But don't you think that even though you came to America at that time, and there was still so much racial inequality here, that you still had a good sense of who you were as a black person coming to America?
Yeah.
that some African Americans who are citizens of this country never felt.
Exactly. You know, so I'm coming as a student and an immigrant student, but coming with a sense that, you know, that I didn't have those experiences that black people in America had. So to me, you know, there was a bit of an advantage in my own thinking about that, but then I had to come and be, you know, a part of that whole experience and lumped in with everybody else.
Yes.
They didn't care whether I was from a country that
Right.
had independence in 1962
Yes.
or what my experience was. I looked like any other black person in America. You know, so that was a challenge, you know, just for me to even, you know, it was kind of like going backwards. This is kind of like a reversal in my own experience
Right.
as a person in
Right.
the world, saying that, you know, I come from an independent place where we are in power. We are the government, it's a black government. We have black people in all kinds of positions, educated black people doing all kinds of things. And to come to America and be not even a second class citizen because I wasn't from here,
Right.
you know, as a foreigner.
Right.
And so trying to even assert myself in that kind of context was a real challenge. And in a place like, you know, I mean, I first went to Michigan and transferred to of all places, Mississippi, and went to an HBCU, Tougaloo College, which was one of the foundations of the Freedom Riders
Mhm.
in the 1960s. People went there and were housed, were fed. A lot of the efforts that the Freedom Riders instituted began at Tougaloo College. And so there was a kind of a mark against Tougaloo College as being kind of like a rebel institution in Mississippi. And so I left there in 1982 and headed back to Trinidad, but a changed person in terms of understanding, having a good sense of an awareness of the struggle of black America, you know, and so that was something that I took with me and not even sure how I would deal with that going back to Trinidad,
Right.
where you already have so much going for us. I mean, we were made independent in 1962, and in 1976 we became a republic where we got rid of our governor general, had our own president.
Right.
And I mean, that was even more autonomy for a little country with 1.5 million people, you know.
But because of how rich in natural resources Trinidad is to this day, among the Caribbean countries, we are the richest in the Caribbean. Oil and natural gas has always been our thing. We do not depend on tourism. That is not part of our gross domestic product.
Right.
And so we came up at a time where our prime minister would say, if you came, you came. We welcome you if you come, but we're not waiting for your dollars to grow our economy.
Right.
And I think that helped form in our minds that, you know, we can do this. We, as a tiny nation, we just felt that there was nothing that we couldn't do.
Right. Yeah.
And somehow that seemed to have transferred to some of us who decided to make America home. There's a kind of strength that I think we bring with us, because it's not easy to pack up and come to America with 2 suitcases, which is essentially what you get to come with,
Right.
and start all over. And so for those of us that come here, there is a level of strength that it really takes for you to not buy a ticket and go back.
Yeah, and so having said that, I think about how many of us have actually immigrated to the United States of America over the years, and we've been coming here for a long time. You know, probably since the 50s, people had been coming to the United States. As a matter of fact, both of my grandfathers came to this country. I'm talking about way back in the 1920s. My father was born in 1920 in Barbados. His father left Barbados probably when he was about 6 or 7 years old, went to New York, he was a carpenter, and actually was employed in his craft, in his trade as a carpenter, in building all kinds of buildings. And then my mother's father was from Nevis, but he at the time was in Trinidad, which is how she managed to be born in Trinidad. But he eventually also left Trinidad and went to New York. And as a matter of fact, what we found out years later was that both of my grandfathers lived in the same building, not even knowing each other, in Brooklyn, New York. So you know, we've been coming for a long time, and I think we've also made significant contributions in this country, in the economy and other aspects of the life and witness of people in America. But I think when I remember leaving to come to the United States in 1990 for us to go to Seabury Western, you know, not knowing what to really expect, because I had not lived in Illinois. You had some experience of having visited your aunt who was living in Chicago on a number of occasions. So it was going to be a new experience to me. But however, I think what was, I think for me, the pointedness of coming at that time was to go to seminary, and I expected the church to be different, and to have a position, to have taken a position on how you welcome people like me, because I was not the first black student at Seabury Western. I was the only black one in my class of 1993. And when we started, there were 26 of us in that class, and I think there were probably only 21 of us that graduated, but I was still the only black person in my class in Evanston, Illinois, in 1993. But I wanted to, as I mentioned that, I wanted to bring in an experience that we had at seminary, that you were the one that really had the experience when you were managing the seminary bookstore.
Yeah, so while Brian was at seminary, we had our first child while he was at seminary. Sakani was actually born the first week of school, grand entrance. And I managed the seminary bookstore. I was the bookstore manager at the time, and juggling being a new mom and doing that work. The bookstore, which we call the bookshelf, we did a lot of mail order of books at the time. This is pre-Amazon, you know, so we mailed books across the country. It was a very well-known bookstore. And so I also ordered, our inventory carried books for Northwestern University, Garrett Evangelical Seminary. They were both across the street, directly across the street from seminary. And like we said earlier, you know, racism was something that we knew, but where we come from, we never really experienced at a level that we experienced here in America. And there was one day that I had an incident with a professor at Northwestern University who came into the store during the lunch period, and I was manning the register and had a couple of other people who were stocking shelves, and he actually said, "I don't want that nigger to help me. Get me somebody white." And I looked at him and smiled. But you know, when that's thrown at you, it hits you at a place where it just hits you at a place when, especially when it's never been said to your face before. And I asked him to leave. I'll tell you what, one of the things about the bookstore was that when I dealt with people over the phone, whenever they called the store and didn't remember my name, they said, "Can I please speak to the British lady?" I was the British lady. But when you came into the store and you saw the British lady,
it was not exactly the British lady you were looking for.
It was not the British lady they were looking for. And so that professor, I kicked him out. I kicked him out of the store. He left, and then I went to the dean and told him what had happened. I mean, folks in the store were just appalled that that had happened. But they made a formal complaint to the university, and really, I don't know what happened to him. But in the 3 years that we were there, he never came back. He never came back to the store. And it's those, what some people might think of as, oh, that's a little thing. That's a huge thing.
Yeah. And it's not something that you anticipated happening in a seminary setting.
No.
Here you are in a seminary bookstore on the seminary campus.
Yeah.
He's coming from outside of the campus, although it might be across the street at Northwestern.
Yeah.
But he's still coming into our environment. Doesn't know anybody in there. Thinks that, because he is a white male, that he has this superiority, this white supremacy, and that, not even realizing that you are the manager of the bookstore. And you have white students at the seminary who are working for you.
For me.
And you happen to just be at the cash register at the time, and then he's talking about he doesn't want that nigger to deal with him, in 1992.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's crazy that
It's
to have
crazy.
had that experience. And I remember how rattled you were because
Yeah.
I was in class,
Yeah.
and I had just left the refectory or whatever. But I remember one of our friends, a Native American guy, John Robertson, who came and found me and said, "Hey, you need to go see Michelle now. She just had an awful experience and in the bookstore." And so I went down, but you came upstairs and met me, and we were talking about it. I couldn't believe that it had happened.
Yeah. I mean, it
There was no
really,
respect.
It really rippled across campus, I think, that had happened to me, to us, that it had happened at Seabury, because it was such an open campus. I never really felt that kind of racism. I never really felt it. I have seen, the little things that folks do, the following you around the store, the letting the door go when you're walking behind them, kind of thing. Those little things that folks do, and I won't just label all of that as being, to me, as black, but when you have a white person that does it to you, different white people that do it to you all the time, yes, it has to do with that. It does. And as we move out of seminary and go back home to Trinidad in '93, we take our son, and we were there for just 3 years.
Yeah. I came back in 1996 to go to a small congregation on the south side of Chicago that I was familiar with, St. George and Matthias, as their vicar. And I remember when because bishops need to talk to one another when those things happen. And at the time, the bishop of Chicago was Frank Griswold, who eventually became the presiding bishop. But he had to call my bishop and say, "Look, folks in this church saying they would like to have Brian come up and be their vicar or whatever." And I remember my bishop having a conversation with me and saying, but the people in Trinidad and Tobago need you too. Is, not just the folks in Chicago. And I kind of had to remind him that, when we get ordained, we are ordained in Christ's one holy Catholic and apostolic church wherever it exists.
Yes.
And so I think it was on that basis that he said, you're free to go if that's what you want to do. And knowing that I was going to be coming back to the United States of America, where we had that kind of experience, and where I went to school in Mississippi and had similar experiences there, and even the bishop mentioned that to me. He says, "Are you sure that you want to go?" He said, "I know this is 1996, but are you sure you want to go back to America?" He said, "There's a lot of discrimination and racism in that place, and you are going to experience it. Are you prepared to go and do that?" And I said, "Well, my first stint going there was 1977. And so I know something about that, but it was still something to anticipate. And, it has not stopped, really. I mean, we didn't have some of the kinds of experiences that I know about, that we read about in the news or see on the television. That we haven't had that, but we've had some other situations that you might recall. The other thing that I think was with did Jelani have an experience?
Yeah. So our younger son, we live in a neighborhood that is now predominantly black, but when we moved in here,
16 years ago.
16 years ago was probably 50-50.
Yeah, or 40. Maybe we may have been had
Um,
40% of it. Yeah.
And so our subdivision where we live in Snellville, we have a neighborhood pool. And so our youngest son was walking from our house going to the pool. Our son was going to the pool in our subdivision, and he was stopped by the police because, and they questioned him about somebody that they were looking for, and then they wanted to search his backpack.
Now, mind you, that was the police were part of what we call the neighborhood watch.
The neighborhood.
We had a relationship with the police in the area. They would
Yes,
come into the
it's the
neighborhood and
cops, yeah.
yeah, cops is what it's called, COPS.
And but he was 12 years old. They're asking for ID, and he was just walking to the pool. I was really incensed.
Because he never got to go to
He
the
never
pool
went to
after
the pool.
all.
He came home. He was so scared that he had to empty his backpack to show the police officer what was in his backpack. This was in the middle of the summer. He's going to the pool. It's not like he had run away from school. That it was during the day when he
Yeah.
should have been in school.
And his parents at work.
We were at work, grandma's home, and he stopped for walking to the pool in his
Neighborhood.
at 12 years old. And it's the fear that I have each and every time that our boys walk out the house, and now they're driving. I mean, our first son had an incident coming home one morning. It was after midnight. It was probably after 1 a.m. He was probably in his second or third year of college. Driving home, and got stopped about 2 miles from our house. And the first thing that the police officer said to him was, "Just give me the drugs." And he said, "What do you mean, sir? Sir, I don't have any drugs." So they took him out, and by this time now we've got 3 cars on the scene. You and I are here asleep.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't even say why they stopped him, other than asking for drugs. He's handcuffed, taken out of the car, his car is searched, and then he gets a $25 ticket for a tint on his window that's too dark at about 2 a.m. in the morning. That's all that they got, was his tint was too dark on a Jetta that we bought like that.
Yeah, we didn't tint
We didn't tint it.
We didn't tint the windows. We bought the car like that and had been driven like that for a long time. And then he gets stopped and given the ticket. It was more than $25. I don't remember exactly what it was, but because I had to pay it. But you know, for something as trite as that, because they couldn't find any drugs in this young black man driving at 1:30 in the morning, you know. But that was, you know, kind of like some of the sadness that we've experienced, you know, living while black in America,
Yes.
in Snellville, Georgia.
Yeah. And you know, to folks that might think that we're anti-police or anti any kind of military or anything, my father was a policeman,
And my father was in the military in Trinidad.
and we have nephews in the military. You know, we have cousins in our family on both sides. We have people that have served this country, this United States. Just as you said, your grandfather.
Yeah, my grandfather. Yeah, my maternal grandfather was a member of the United States Army, and died in I think it was 1961. I was just about 6 years old when he died, but you know, so we know about the military and police experience, and so
Yeah.
it's not about being, but you know, but to the point that you're making is that, you know, our sons are now scared. They're afraid of the police, you know, distrusting, you know, and so they have to live as black men in America with those kinds of feelings. That's no freedom.
No.
You can't really express any
No.
freedom there.
And it's a it's also a kind of helplessness that I feel as a mother, not just a black mother, but as a mother. But every time you see one of these incidents happen anywhere across this country, it really makes me hold my children so much closer. I fear for them. I really, really fear for them every time they leave the house.
Yep.
And no parent
Should have to feel that way.
should have to feel. No parent.
Yeah, just imagine what we feel when we look on the television and see the parents who have lost children, and brutally, you
Yes.
know, and there seems to be no recourse.
Right. Right.
When will it end?
Right.
You know,
And
but we want to bring the. Go ahead and see what you were going to say, and then we can talk about the experience here
Well, let's go to that. So
in 2012.
2012, we are we've been living here now for
At that time,
at
8
that
years.
time 8 years in Snellville in this house, and we were having a refrigerator delivered, and the folks came. They were in it was Sears, but they came in an unmarked white truck,
Delivery truck.
big truck.
It was at night too, so.
Yeah, but it wasn't that dark.
Yeah.
It was probably around 6 p.m. And they came and the lights are all on in the house and unboxed the new refrigerator in the driveway and bring it in, take the old one out. It's sitting in the driveway, and so while you are there helping them get the new one situated, I just decided to walk outside because there's material and stuff sitting in the driveway. And I noticed 2 police cars in the cul-de-sac. So I turn around to come back inside just to say, hey babe, there are 2 police cars outside in the cul-de-sac. I'm thinking it's at one of our neighbors' houses. But then I meet 2 police officers coming from the back of our house. They had been standing in the back,
Observing all that the activity
observing
going on.
us from the backyard through the windows.
Mhm.
We don't even know how long they were there.
Right.
And they say, we got a call about suspicious activity at this location. And you had to produce.
Yeah, I had to go out to the front. I mean, I went to the front to meet the guy, and you know, he's like, "Do you live here?" I'm like, "Yes, I do." And he says, "Well, could you prove that?" And I said, "Yes, I can," because I don't really want any trouble with the police. So I went and get my ID, and I showed him that I'm the resident of this house, and that we are having a refrigerator delivered, right, to our house. There's no crime being committed. You know, we just might be a black family.
Having a refrigerator.
But-
And something as simple as a refrigerator. You know, and the box is out in the driveway.
And so is the
But
truck.
So, you know, my neighbor who called the police never thought to call us. In this subdivision we have everybody's numbers.
We have a directory.
We have a directory with
Everybody's name,
everybody's
address.
name and their numbers. There was no call, hey Brian, hey Michelle, is everything okay there? There was no call. The call went to the police.
Mhm.
For us, as black people, we would prefer not to have contact with the police.
Right.
Because it just doesn't end well for us.
Mhm. We were fortunate that it did that night,
Yes.
so that they left, I guess, satisfied that we were really the occupants of this residence, and so we were having a refrigerator delivered, and they left. You know,
Yeah.
but it didn't have to end that way, I'm sure. But thank God it did.
I think for a number of families of young people, be they black male or black female, there's a kind of fear I know I have for our boys whenever they're not here. Whenever they walk out the house, Mom, Dad, I'm heading out. You just don't sleep
Mhm.
until you hear the garage door. You
Right.
don't sleep.
So just remember, 2012 was the same year that the Reverend Robert Wright, who was rector at St. Paul's, Atlanta, was elected bishop of this diocese. 2012, that's the same year that that happened. So just let that sink in a little bit. It's not that long ago. And I wanted to take us to an experience that I have had as a black clergyman in the Episcopal Church, because one of the things that we've talked about for years is that we're probably seeing a little bit more of it happening now, but white congregations tend not to call. Notice that I didn't say hire, because churches don't hire clergy, they call them. White congregations tend not to call black clergy to be their rector, priest in charge, vicar, or whatever. You might be an assistant, right, but not to be in charge. You might elect a black bishop, because bishops are not in your congregation on a daily basis. They might come once a year, once every 2 years, so you don't really have to deal with that. But so I was encouraged by a white friend who was serving in this diocese, in the Diocese of Atlanta one time, and she eventually went to another diocese, and so asked if I would consider, because she wanted to be part of the diversity or the diversification of this particular congregation in her diocese, because she figured that it was time that they attracted more people of color in the diocese, and this would be a good place to start. So she encouraged me to put my name in, so I was in the process, and got to the point, had my first couple interviews, and then the next thing would be to have my name forwarded to the vestry by the discernment committee, so that the vestry would now interview me and make a decision. I would be one of the finalists. Each of the, I guess, persons who will be becoming a finalist had a shepherd on the discernment committee. My shepherd, I was actually attending a Credo conference in Richmond, Virginia, back in 2014, when I got the call from my shepherd saying that, you know, he had some bad news and he was so hurt, so discouraged about it, but he had to call and give me this bad news that they were going to cut me. They were getting ready to send the names of the finalists, and I was going to be one of them. But he said that, you know, unfortunately they couldn't do that, because the word was that if my name went before the vestry, with the potential of being called to be the rector, if I were called to be that rector, a number of those white members of that parish would leave because of a black priest coming to serve them. And, you know, he was, I guess, honest, sincere enough, authentic enough to be able to tell me that that was the reason. That hurt. But I wasn't surprised.
Yeah. Yeah.
2014.
Yeah. I think that's something that I've said to my colleagues all the time, that until and unless we commit to having authentic conversations around race and racism in this country, there'll be no growth. We cannot pussyfoot around this anymore. We cannot turn our eyes away, and it's not, the onus really is not on us to teach white people how they're supposed to behave. For me to tell you that I am a person just as you are, this is work that we all do, but we're all children of God, and if we start there's some hard conversations we have to have. And if we don't commit to that work, somebody else is going to be having this conversation again pretty soon. We have to commit to this, you know.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of round things out here by you know, making reference again to the letter that I wrote to the Diocese of New Jersey back in June, subsequent to the death of George Floyd, and really kind of, you know, looking at the response of the diverse groups of people around the world, and here in the United States of America particularly. There are thousands and thousands of people who joined the protests, a lot of white people, people who were in support of this new movement, whether it was Black Lives Matter or just trying to address the issue of race and discrimination, finally. And to say that, you know, the church has a responsibility, and I'm really happy to know that there are young people in the church like you who are willing to take this on and to make a difference. That you have been, as far as the church understands, our responsibility as church is to make disciples, right, for the work of reconciliation in the world. Reconciliation is a major key to who we are as Christians, as disciples of Jesus Christ. We are to be reconciled to one another and by extension to God. And so I'm really hopeful because of the work that you are prepared to do on this front, to face this reality head on and to challenge the rest of your country to do this. So in the words of John Lewis, we have a responsibility now to really work on saving this nation. The soul of this nation is at risk, and we have a responsibility to do that, and it really is in your hands. So I thank you for taking this on. But let me just say something else about what we are supposed to do as disciples of Jesus Christ. We can't continue as Christians to turn a blind eye and to maintain a silence about the sin of racism. It's not helpful to the process of the eradication of that sin. And in the words of Jesus, the one whom we have agreed to follow, he says this, and I quote, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And that's from the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. So with that, I wish you well. I ask God's blessings upon you and on your work. And we will see how this goes going forward. Thank you very much. Peace out.